So thank you, first of all, Oak, this morning. Loved your presentation. Fantastic work on that, and vision and direction. I love the impact that this organization is having. And I was sitting back as Allie was talking, and she was mentioning a little bit about, I move around too much. I'm sorry. I'll try to stay put. She was mentioning a little bit about the Constitution, and it was just like, I love that we're exercising that liberty of freedom to assemble right here on a Saturday morning in Provo, getting together, discussing ideas that are transformational and can impact our country. And I appreciate Allie and Addie and what you guys spoke about, especially about that contrast of the force philosophy versus the freedom principle. I love that. And Addie kind of spoke about, I'm going to really kind of essentially speak about the same thing, but I'm going to speak about it from a very different direction, if you will. Allie spoke on kind of from an institutional level, which is hugely important. And we as Americans need to be fully aware of and fully participating in institutions that are holding back other institutions from that force philosophy, right? I want to talk about it, though, from the individual and family standpoint of your child and even your education. So we're going to kind of shift gears outside of the institutional level, and let's just go right into your child and you, okay? How many of you have ever had a professor, a teacher, sort of like this guy? And what I mean by this guy is he likes to profess to you and tell you what to think. Has anyone ever had that type of an educator? Okay, quite a few of us have. Professor Bateman at Brigham Young University, he talks about what's called the Ophelia syndrome. This is the best picture I can find of Ophelia. Who's read Hamlet? Play Hamlet. Okay, what happens with Ophelia? Who can tell me? She does. She ends up committing suicide, right? It's a very, very sad story, the Ophelia part of that story. Earlier in the play, she goes to her new father-in-law, and she's like confused, right? If you know the context of the play, before the play begins, Hamlet's father has been killed, and there's a new king, and this is his new stepfather, and everyone's confused, including Hamlet. But Hamlet has the spirit of his father coming to him and telling him to avenge him, and Hamlet he struggles with the morals of that, and there's a lot of issues there. And meanwhile, Ophelia is simply confused on everything that's going on. And her stepfather says to her, "Think yourself a baby, and I will tell you what to think." Think of the audacity of that phrase. Yet so often, that's exactly what modern education is doing. Think yourself a baby, and I will tell you what to think. It's too bad. America was founded on independent thinking, and today, where we thrive because of independent thinking. I was just recently listening to Elon Musk and talking about college education and the problem with our education system. And I just thought, and he could have given a presentation right here, and it would have fallen in line with the principles that Oak was talking about this morning. Where we see independent thinking, we're seeing entrepreneurship, we're seeing a new level of impact. And where we don't, we see crisis. And we definitely have a lot of crisis in the United States. So we want to develop great thinking. So again, coming back to not the institutional level, but to the individual level, I want to talk to you about kind of the fundamental idea of owning your education, the very first psychological step to owning your education and of your children owning your education. Addie was a fantastic example that she's already completed this psychological step. The psychological step that we have to kind of, or roadblock, if you will, that we have to overcome is called the psychological projection. I'm going to take a story from Ken Wilber, who's a kind of a modern philosopher. I don't really agree with everything Ken has to say, but he does have some really powerful things around this subject that I really agree with. So I'm going to take a story from him, and I've augmented it and kind of shrunk it down for our purposes today, but it's his story, so I want to cite him up front. All right, so tell me if you've ever had this experience. Emmett decides to do his math homework. Anyone ever done that before? Anyone ever had a child do that before? Poor souls. All right. So he goes up to his room to begin, but a strange thing happens as he sits down to start. He sharpens his pencils, he cleans his desk, he updates some software on his computer, he browses some websites for tips on his math, he checks in on Facebook, he leafs through his math book. He starts to have second thoughts, and he wonders if he should wait till his dad gets home in case he needs some help. What is Emmett doing? Say it a little louder. Avoiding, procrastinating, right? Any other terms around that? What is he doing? Getting distracted, right? Yeah. He doesn't leave the room because his desire to do his math is still greater than his desire not to. But he is starting to procrastinate and forget his own drive. Now think of it like a physical thing. It's not a physical thing. But by alienating his drive, he begins to project it away from himself. Has anyone ever done this? Raise your hand if you've ever had this experience, not necessarily with math, but with anything. You go to do something, and then you sort of putter around the edges of that thing, right? And we don't really actually step up and do that thing. We just kind of putter around the edges. All right. So he gradually becomes angry and annoyed with the whole thing. All he really needs to complete the projection, that is to totally forget his own drive to do his math, is a likely candidate upon which to project his drive. Enter the unsuspecting victim. Emmett's mom gets home. She innocently asks, "How's the math going?" How do you think Emmett responds? What do you think? It's good, Mom. Yeah, okay. Coming from a mom, she's had that experience. Anyone else? Yeah, don't nag me, Mom. Anyone else? What do you think? How do you think Emmett might respond? I'm getting there. Yeah, I'm working on it. How's he feeling? Is he feeling defensive? Do you think? Why? Yeah. He knows he needs to be doing this thing, but he's not, so he's not getting it done. So he responds, "Mom, arg," which I've actually never heard a young person say, but it's Ken Wilber. All right. So Emmett now feels pressure, not from himself. Notice this. This is key. Emmett now feels pressure, not from himself, but from his mom. The projection is completed using self-deception. He convinces himself that it's not he, but his mom, that wants him to do the math. He thinks, she acts so sweet on the outside, but subtly, she's been pressuring him all along. Now let's pause there for a moment. I didn't create a slide for this, but we've all seen the pictures of the above water and below water of a large iceberg, right? And psychologists for years have been using that as kind of the idea of the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. It's a model, it's not real, but it's something that we can all kind of broadly understand, right? So it's not that he is consciously going, I'm going to blame my mom for this and put we don't think that way, do we? But subconsciously, he's projected it onto her, and now it's her that's pressuring him. And he's actually experiencing it as an outside pressure. All of this is happening within him, happening in his own psychology. It's not his mom. But we convince ourselves that it's someone else's problem. And we've actually built institutions in our country that only reconfirm this, right? Whose fault is it if your son or daughter is not doing well in school? We often, as Americans, blame the teacher, blame the school, blame the system, blame all these things. And there are some serious problems in many of those situations. But if we want our children to own their education, they've got to decide to. So let's keep going. So if Emmett were really innocent of the drive, he probably would have answered that he hadn't really begun and that he was now going to begin. But he did not, because in his gut, he knew that somebody really wanted him to do this math that day. Since it feels clearer that it wasn't him, it must have been somebody else. As his mom, the likely candidate, appears, he throws his projected drive onto her. By projecting his drive, Emmett experiences it externally, as a demand coming from the outside, Another word for external drive is pressure. In fact, get this. Anytime a person projects some sort of drive, he or she will feel pressure coming from the outside. Believe it or not, this is all external pressure amounts to in the end. External pressure can only be effective if it can hook your own projected drive. All right, let's put this into practice. Can I get a volunteer? Will you come up? You, yeah. She's like, dang it. All right. What's your name?
Heather.
Hi, Heather. I'm Adam. Okay, come on up here. You can get out of there. There you go. Okay, so Heather. All right, Heather. Thanks for volunteering. All right, so Heather, let's say we're going to kind of put this into practice. Let's say I'm walking down the street, you're walking down the street, we don't know each other, okay? And I come up to you and I say, hi, ma'am, this is going to sound ridiculous, but bear with me. Ma'am, I really need you to do something for me. Will you go paint that cow over there purple? Okay, pause here.
Whoa.
Now, you would probably be annoyed.
I'd start backing up a little bit.
Yeah, you'd be like, who's this guy? Yeah. But tell me this. Would you feel pressure to actually go do that thing?
No.
Zero pressure, right? It's kind of ridiculous, but zero pressure. Okay. Now, Heather, give me something that you're working on in your life that you might be procrastinating. Oh, okay, perfect. This is wonderful. Okay. So let's say Heather and I are old friends, and I say, Heather, how's it going with unpacking from the move? Pause there. Do you feel pressure?
Totally.
Yeah. And tell them why.
Because I'm still working on it and it's taking forever and I don't think I'm ever going to get done and yeah, that's the reason.
Yeah. So what's the difference? Am I pressuring her? Am I saying, Heather, you've got to go get those boxes done. Why are you at this conference today? It's Saturday. It's a perfect day for that. I'm not doing it.
I totally thought that on the way here. That was good.
Okay. So, but I wasn't doing that, right? I just asked you about how it's going. Thank you. Thank you, Heather. We will not feel pressure unless it can hook an internal drive, something that we, deep down, want to do anyway. And it's there the educational choice begins. When we take responsibility for that drive, Emmett went to go do his math. We have a choice. We either follow through with that drive or we project it onto other people and blame them. Let me give you a story about this. When I was 12 years old, I was homeschooled up until this point. My parents put me into this kind of co-op style kind of program. And it was run by a group of people I would describe as conservative hippies. We have a term for that today. We call them crunchy cons, right? But back then they didn't have that. So they were just kind of these conservative hippie people. And they really believed in a phrase. They didn't use this particular phrase, but they believed in the concept that Addie used of inspire, not require. Anyone ever heard of that phrase before Addie? Yes, inspire, not require. So they really believed in that concept. They didn't call it that, but they wanted everyone to choose their education. So very first day of classes, 12 years old, they would say to the whole school, actually, we want you to choose to be here. We want you to want to be here. We're not going to force you to do anything. And my 12-year-old brain went, really? And I raised my hand and I said, so you mean like I could leave? Yeah, as long as you're safe, just be safe. If you need to go out into the hall or if you need to take a break, go ahead. And my 12-year-old brain went, these people are a bunch of suckers. And so about 15 minutes later, I got up, walked out, grabbed my skateboard, and went outside and skateboarded all day long until it was over. My mom picked me up and I left. That was it. You guys are thinking, this guy's speaking at an education conference now. So I continued to do that. I would go outside. There was a factory nearby, and they had a basketball hoop, and their factory workers would go out and take breaks and play basketball. I'd go play basketball with them. They had these very large, weird bathrooms. The bathrooms were like about a quarter of the size of this room, so big bathrooms. And one side they had the stalls and so forth, and then they had on the other side sinks and then couches. And my adult self thinks, that's gross. But my 12-year-old self said, what a great place to take a nap. And I would go in there and I would take a nap. And for that entire school year, that's pretty much what I did. I took full advantage of my agency and stayed in that bathroom. That summer, hanging out with my best friend, he and I were kind of weird kids. I think we were really competitive, but we loved statistics. We kept statistics on everything we did. We kept statistics on average steps between each other's homes. We kept statistics on every basketball game we played in the front yard, and then we would average over months our shooting percentage, our rebounds, every video game we played. We kept in fact, I was recently hanging out with him a couple years ago, and he brought out this binder full of these stats from our childhood. And I was like, you haven't thrown this away? And he's like, it's our childhood in statistical form. How can I do that? So I'm hanging out with him. I'm 13 at this point, and he says, oh, Adam, I learned how they figure out QB rating, quarterback rating. It's basically where they combine 9 different statistics of a quarterback into one number. It's like the holy grail for us, right? Oh, you get to combine all the statistics into one number and see who's best. So we loved that idea, and he learned how to run those equations. Takes basically some pre-algebra to do it. And he started showing me, and that year I should have learned some pre-algebra. I couldn't follow. Had no clue what he was saying. I, for the first time in my life, felt dumb. I had done dumb things, but I felt like, oh, am I broken? Is there something wrong with me? Am I dumb? So I made some excuse. Oh, my mom needs me. And I left. I'm walking home, not tracking my steps this time. And instead, I'm thinking about it. And the weight of the world is on my 13-year-old shoulders. And I realized I just wasted a whole year of my education sleeping in a bathroom. What was I doing? That's how I felt. So I went home. And I projected onto Mom. Mom, why'd you send me to this crazy conservative hippie school? What? Ah! I projected onto her. She was smart enough to recognize that, and she said, well, Adam, it's your education. You get to decide. What? No, you're supposed to force me. You're supposed to make me do these things. No, it's really up to you. Well, Mom, all year long, I've been sleeping in a bathroom and playing basketball and skateboarding. I know. What? You knew? Yeah. Bubbles bursting in my head. What? All these things I thought I had hidden. Nope. She knew. And so I'm frustrated. I'm not buying what she's selling. So she says, okay, let's go down to the school and let's talk to so-and-so, the gentleman there. He was basically like the school counselor. And let's go talk to him and let's see if we can make a plan. Okay. So we go down a few days later, talk to him. He sits down and he does what a lot of us as adults do with kids. I believe in you. You can do this. Your life isn't over. You're 13. Kind of, and I'm not buying it. So I'm pushing back left and right. Again, continuing to project this weird school and why do you guys do these things and yada, yada, yada. I'm saying all these things to him. And finally, he says, well, Adam, what are you really worried about? And I said, well, if I'm a year behind now, I'm probably, because I think of education at this point as a conveyor belt, and it's year after year, and then you graduate, and you get that stamp of approval. I said, well, I'm going to graduate late now, aren't I? I'm a year behind. And he goes, Adam, don't think of it that way. If you want to, you could graduate a year early. And I go, yeah, right. Maybe I'll graduate 2 years early. And he goes, He walks up to this whiteboard, in his office, and he starts creating. I'm 13 at this point, so if I was going to graduate 2 years early, I would graduate in 3 years. And he creates this whole 3-year map to fulfill all their requirements and standards in order to graduate. Maps it all out, everything I'd have to do. Doesn't look at me literally for 10 minutes. And then he turns around and he looks at me and he goes, "What do you think?" And to this day, I have no clue why I said this. I said, "Okay." And I went to work. And for the first time in my life, I owned my education. It was mine. I saw the path forward. I saw the plan. Looking back now as an educator, wasn't the most amazing plan. It didn't teach me how to think, and it didn't give me a liberal arts education that I think we as human beings need. But it was the first time in my life I owned my education. I went to work. I worked all of that summer, worked through the school year, worked every summer after that, and graduated 2 years early. Again, not from a stellar school, not from a stellar program, but I owned it for the first time in my life. Getting kids to own their education is the first step in anyone's education. It's either our problem and we take ownership of it and we do something about it, or we project it onto other people and it's their problem and it's their fault. You fix that problem, you get Addies, right? You get Sarah that Allie was talking about. That's the student you get when you get them to own their education. Okay, so let me go a little deeper here. There's actually 3 types of projections. There's the other people projection, projecting onto mom that we've already talked about. There's also projecting onto our identity. Who here has ever said, "I'm not good at that"? We basically, at that moment, we create an identity that says, it's its fault. I was born this way. Right? I'm not good at math. I'm not good at, that's the way I was raised. We blame an identity as if it's separate from us. It's just the way I am. We project onto it, and we absolve ourselves of responsibility to have to do anything about it. Truth is, we can own that and say, am I good at math? Let's see, and go to work. Or we can just say, I'm not, and give up from the very beginning. We can even project onto other things. Who's ever blamed the computer for not getting something done? Okay, lots of hands. Yeah. We can project onto even other things, situations, and other people, like I've already said. Projections come in many forms, but it's not until we learn to own our education individually that we can start getting a real education. Okay, at that point, once we've helped our students own their education, then we need to help them do one more thing. Own their cognitive biases. This is the second big roadblock to getting a great education. I'm going to talk about confirmation bias first. Everything you look for and all that you perceive has a way of proving whatever you believe. You ever seen that? Have you ever talked to a liberal person or a conservative person or a libertarian or anything, and every piece of evidence that comes out, every political thing seems to prove their viewpoint? Have you noticed that? So we all end up just kind of speaking past each other 90% of the time, right? Because we're all proving ourselves right. Yet we disagree in the first place. I'm going to play a game. You guys ready for a game? Liven it up a little bit? Okay. So I've got 3 numbers on the board here, 2, 4, and 8. These 3 numbers, if you've played this before, by the way, don't ruin it for everyone else. But 2, 4, and 8, these numbers follow a certain mathematic pattern. Okay? Pattern's fairly obvious. The name of the game is you figure out what the pattern is. The way you play is you give me your own set of 3 numbers, and then I will tell you whether or not your 3 numbers follow the same pattern. And you can decipher from that what the pattern is. Does that make sense? So you just give me your own set of 3 numbers, and then you can determine from that what the pattern is. Okay? Ready? Okay, go. Anyone? Right here in the back. Say it one more time. 3, 9, 27. Yes, fits the pattern. What's the pattern? Sorry, say it one more time. So times the number by itself. To the power, yeah. So no, that's not it. But good one. Let's go here. 3, 6, 12. Yes, fits the pattern. What's the pattern? Sure. Oh, so you're seeing that. And then so 3, 6, 12. 3 plus 3 is 6. 6 plus 6 is. Wouldn't fit the other pattern, but yeah, it does fit the pattern, but no, that's not it.
What's the next number after 8?
It's only 3 numbers. Okay, I think you might be onto it, but let's go here. Anyone? Okay, let's pause there. All right, so what's your name in the back? Brian or Ryan? Ryan? Okay, thanks, Ryan. So Ryan, tell me, did you have a theory on what the pattern was before you gave me your 3 numbers? Yeah, you did, right? And your theory was what again? Yeah, okay. So you fell victim to that, and then let's go here. Same thing, right? Did you have a theory in your mind of what it was before you said it? Okay. This is what's called confirmation bias. What we often try to do as human beings is we try to prove ourselves right. So you had a theory in your mind, and you gave me 3 numbers that fit your theory, right? But your 3 numbers actually did fit the pattern, so you got a yes, which created what? A false positive. You got a positive result. Yes, fits the pattern. What is the pattern? But it didn't help you to determine what the pattern was. False positives are a big problem, actually, in our world, because we often try to prove ourselves right, and instead, we need to actually seek to prove ourselves wrong. So, Ryan, give me 3 numbers that don't fit your original theory. In other words, give me 3 numbers that would disprove your theory if I say yes.
Well, the double would be 2, 4, 8, and 16.
So say it again.
So 4, 8, and 16.
4, 8, and 16 do fit the pattern, and that would disprove your theory. So now what do you know for a fact? That your theory was wrong, right? See, when we try to disprove our theories, we learn a lot more because we know for a fact. See, before when you gave me 3 numbers, I'm moving away, sorry. Before when you gave me 3 numbers that fit the theory, you got a false positive. And it didn't lead you to the conclusion. But now what do you know for a fact? You know that your theory was wrong. Yeah, there is. There's multiple solutions. Good. So let's go back to you. Give me 3 numbers that totally just go off theory. Give me 3 numbers that totally don't fit your theory at all. 1, 5, and 14. Yes, fits the pattern. What's the pattern? Say it. No, it's not just 3 numbers. Yeah, numbers in ascending order. That's all it is. Do you see how we want to prove ourselves right, so we give theories and ideas to fit, or we give numbers and examples to fit our theories. And if we can choose our numbers and examples, we can always find stuff that'll fit our theory. We can prove ourselves right on a lot of things. But is that education? Honestly, I'm really asking you, is that education? Proving ourselves right? It's not. Learning how to think. Learning how to think is education. All right, let's do it again. Okay, but this time we're going to use people. Who are these 3 people? Good Americans. Good. All right, we've got a good group of Americans. Okay, these 3 men have one thing in common that I'm thinking of. Okay, the way you play this game, same basic game, is you give me another person, and I will tell you if that other person has the same commonality. Make sense? And then you can determine what the commonality is. It needs to be a person I would know, though, so it can't be Joe down the street because I don't know Joe down the street, okay? So give me someone you think I would know, And again, but this time, come up with a theory in your mind. A theory is a good thing. A theory is thinking. But try to disprove your theory instead of try to prove it. Okay? So go against your theory.
James Madison.
Okay, so James Madison. All right, Oak. So James Madison, he is a yes. He has the same commonality. What is the commonality?
Founding father.
Yes. Okay, good. So, but what you did there is, again, you gave me an example that fit your theory. And let's change it, okay? Because that gave you a false positive. Yes, has the same commonality, but doesn't give you actually any new information. Do you see how that is, guys? Do you see how when we try to prove ourselves right, we actually don't get new information? We actually don't learn anything more. We just get the satisfaction of, I'm right, right? And when we can actually determine if we're wrong later, we have some regret there. So give me someone who, your theory is founding fathers, okay, which is not it, but let's just assume that you don't know that right now. Give me someone who's not a founding father.
Karl Marx.
Karl Marx, perfect. Definitely not a founding father. Karl Marx would be a no in this situation. Okay? What's different about Karl Marx than these three people and James Madison? Now we're going to get to something. Okay, let's go a little bit further. Who else?
Albert Pike.
Who's Albert Pike? I apologize.
Albert Pike was a general of the Southern Confederacy.
Oh, okay. A general of the Southern Confederacy.
He was also a Freemason.
And also a Freemason. Okay. Okay, so I don't know enough about him to be 100%, but I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm pretty sure I'm right on this. He fits the theory. Okay? What was your theory? Or he fits, he has the same commonality, I should say. What was your theory?
That all four are Freemasons. Were Freemasons.
Okay, so, but again, what you did is you gave me an example that fits your theory. Do you see how it goes against our nature to do this? It goes against our nature because we want to prove ourselves right. This is what we do. Okay, give me someone who you know is not a Freemason.
John Glenn.
John Glenn, the astronaut? Okay.
Assuming this, I'm making an assumption.
Yeah.
My daughter Heather is not a Freemason because she's a woman.
Okay.
You can't be a Freemason as a woman. So
Okay.
my daughter Heather is not a Freemason.
Okay, so let's go with your daughter Heather. I don't know Heather super well, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say she has the same commonality.
That's the same.
She has the same commonality. Do you see how now you know for a fact that it's not, the commonality is not Freemasons? Because she's not a Freemason. Do you see how disproving or seeking to disprove your theory, go against your theories, actually teaches you more information? Do you see that? See, so often what we do is we say, come up with a theory, come up with an idea, go prove it right. That's not education. We're not teaching us how to think. We're just teaching us how to fall in line with what we already think. And we do this. We do this with our own children. I do this with my 5-year-old. Well, I believe this, son, and then I want him to believe it too, and he's an automaton of exactly, sorry, I'm moving. Too much movement. But we almost want them to become like us and think and choose the same things we would choose. And why not? Because we're perfect, right? We're not. Do we really want our children to know how to think, or do we want them to think like us? As an educator in the classroom, I have to ask myself that question every day. Do I want them to think like me, and therefore do I profess to them what to think? Or do I want to teach them how to think? Okay, let's go. Anyone else? Give me a person. I saw a hand. Abraham Lincoln is yes. What was your theory? No, these guys don't all have beards, so. But no, Abraham Lincoln is a yes, though, so that gives us one more data point. Let's go here. Putin. So, like Karl Marx, he's a no. Exactly, that's it. Do you see how the no often gives you way more information than a yes? A yes can give you a false positive. Or at the very least, it just proves your theory wrong if you went against your theory. But a no shows the contrast, right? But we don't teach this in modern education. We don't teach us how to think. We teach ourselves to prove ourselves right.
So is that applicable in applying the scientific method?
Definitely. And one of the biggest problems so often in the scientific method is the scientific method says collect data, but if you only collect data that agrees with your original theory, you get a lot of bad theories. And we've seen that in science. We've seen that over and over. The biggest breakthroughs are where often you assume something else, and because of that assumption, you discover something entirely different that disproves your original theory, and you go, oh, now I get it. That's where we see power in science. And by the way, that's where we see power in political science. That's where we see policy making and education. All of the same. All right, so let's keep going. So we as human beings always want to seek to prove ourselves right. Instead, if we teach ourselves to prove ourselves wrong, what happens? Either A, you do prove yourself wrong, and isn't that great? Isn't that a good thing to prove yourself wrong? To go, oh, my theory wasn't correct? Or B, you can't. Now, that doesn't mean you're automatically right about that theory, but it shows that you're on to something. As a believer in God, I've tried hard to disprove God. I can't do it. Just can't do it. Okay, let's keep going. One more bias that I want to talk about today, and then I'll wrap up, is the Dunning-Kruger effect, okay? This is often called the overestimation bias. This is Walter Mueller. Walter Mueller is an interesting man. He decided that he wanted to rob a couple banks, and he did so. And he robbed a couple banks because he learned, have you ever done this with your kids, that when you pour lemon juice over over paper and write with it and things like that, it won't show up when it dries. But then if you heat up the paper, right, then the little sugars in the lemon juice show up and you get to see. Have you ever done this with your kids? If you haven't, it's kind of a fun little thing. I did it with my 5-year-old a couple years ago, and we wrote a little message, and then we cooked it in the oven, and the message appeared, and he thought that was really fun. Well, Walter Mueller learned about this, and this is back in the 90s, and he thought, well, videotapes are basically paper. And he thought, if I just pour lemon juice over my face, I won't show up on camera. I'm not making this up. He robbed 2 banks with lemon juice poured all over his face. Made his way home after robbing both banks. All they had to do is just go to the tape. They saw this is from the actual tape. They see him there, and they go to his home. People in the community knew who he was. They go to his home. They arrest Walter. And he says, "You've got nothing on me. You have no proof." And they said, "We have video evidence." And he says, "No." And they go and they show him at the precinct, and turns out, oh. And then he tells them. And it gets all over national news. Jay Leno was making jokes about it, how much of an idiot or whatever, like, poor guy. But there was a couple psychologists named Dunning and Kruger who saw this and said, wait a second, there must be something to this. There must be a psychological principle here. So they devised a test. They brought a bunch of people in, hundreds of people, and had them take kind of like a miniature version of the ACT test that also involved some things about humor, actually testing on humor along with it, okay? So like a mini ACT with a little bit of questions about humor, and it takes people about half hour to take. And here were their results. Their results are fascinating. The blue line here represents the actual testing results, okay? So you have the bottom quartile average, the second quartile average, the third quartile average, and the top quartile. Does that make sense? You got that? Now, the red line represents their perceived score. So before they took the test, they were asked, how well do you think you'll do on this test? Okay? And then after actually taking the test, they said, how well do you think you did? And the red and green lines represent that. Look at the disparity between the bottom quartile and where they thought they scored. Isn't that fascinating? Second quartile Still a major gap, but not as bad as the first quartile. Third quartile was actually fairly accurate. And then the top performers on the test actually underestimated, both before and after taking the test, how well they did. And Dunning and Kruger thought, there must be a principle here. And this is called the Dunning-Kruger effect. In fact, I have a t-shirt that has this on it. That's how much of a geek I am. And it shows, you've got down here on this bottom axis, experience and confidence. When you're brand new to something, our confidence is extremely high. And then it wanes, and then finally when we get to the level of expert, our confidence does come up. But notice that it's never as strong as when we started. Who here, when you were maybe 14, 15, 16 years old, thought, my parents are idiots and I would do this way better? Anyone ever had that thought as a teenager? Okay, a couple of you are admitting it. I bet the rest of you did. We tend to think before we ever actually experience something how great we would be at it. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect, and they won a Nobel Prize for it in 2000 for psychology, because they've found that this test is incredibly consistent across the board. The lesser educated the person, the more overly confident they are about their abilities. What does this actually show us? Have you ever gotten deeper into your education and then realized, whoa, there's so much I don't know? Have anyone had that experience where it's almost like a chasm opens up and you're just like, there's so much more to know? And it's humbling, right? That's the experience we want our students to have. That's the experience that we want ourselves to have. Why? Because it actually humbles us. Great education, this is from Buckminster Fuller, the more we learn, the more we realize how little we know. Great education teaches us that. It humbles us. It shows us that while there might be a great plan, it's not our plan. It's not my personal plan. That I'm just part of this process. Let me end with just a fast story and then I'll wrap up. There once was a carpenter, not the carpenter you might be thinking of, an elderly carpenter getting ready to retire. And he goes to his boss, the contractor, and he says, "Boss, I'm ready to leave the house building business and go spend more time with my family. So I'm going to retire." And he says, "Oh, I'm really sorry to see you go. Can you build one more house for us? Just one more, and then call it quits." And he says, "Okay, yeah, I'll just do one more." So he goes to work on this final house, the end of his career. And he goes about working on it, and have any of you ever done this? You get trunky, as a lot of LDS missionaries like to say. You start to maybe cut some corners at the end, not do quite as good of work. Anyone ever done that? You know, when you're at the tail end of a project and you're just trying to get it done? Well, he did that. He didn't give it his best. He cut corners, used shoddy workmanship. He used inferior materials. But the job was well enough done. And then as the contractor went through to inspect the home, the contractor did so and then walked out of the house and walked up to him and he said, handed him a key, said, "This is your house, my gift to you," and walked away. So it is with our lives. We are not willing to give it our best because we're not willing to own what's ours to own. Our education, our lives. We project it onto others and we blame others. We're not willing to overcome our own biases and actually challenge our thinking. Instead, we're comfortable in our thinking and just want to prove it right. To live a great life and to get a great education requires us to own our education and requires us to overcome our own simple biases and to seek for something greater. Thanks.